All right, everyone, we are back with the next installment of our VOD series. So this episode is kind of interesting. It's quite literally a pretty organic conversation between myself and George. He literally just sort of grabbed me to the side and said, "Hey, let's record an episode." And we really didn't have any agenda in mind. And honestly, you kind of get a pretty good insight into just what a general conversation with George Hariri is like. This is honestly a conversation you would have over a beer or a juice or whatever George drinks. So hope you enjoy it. And we'll all be talking about it in the intro. So here we go.
All right, this is the Pursuit of Ownership. My name is George, and I'm with Tyler, and we're here at the Voices of Dentistry, and we are recording an episode.
Welcome back to the Pursuit of Ownership. We are here at the Voices of Dentistry, as you can probably tell by the den of voices behind me. I'm here with George Hariri, and he's going to have some insights for us about what it's like to be at this event. And, well, actually, just take it away, George. I don't know. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so Tyler and I, we had some time. We had a microphone, and I said, well, let's record. He said, what do you want to record? Well, we'll record something.
I'll put on a pair of headphones and pick up a mic, and we'll just go off. So
Here we are, and we really have no objective.
No.
But I think, one thing that has been apparent since the Pursuit of Ownership launched is, I guess, how much it's needed, wanted, and how much people are liking it. So kudos to you, man.
Dude, I am honestly I got to admit, I'm a bit surprised. Not because I didn't think what we were doing was cool or needed, but maybe it's just a personal thing, but I just did not envision it taking off and having downloads and hearing from people that they've enjoyed the episodes. I don't know. It just feels like it's just the two of us talking, having a good time. We're sharing experiences and just having the sort of normal conversations that we have, but people are enjoying it. So that's just really humbling and cool. And I don't really know how to react to it yet. So
yeah, no, and I think it's it takes a minute for sure.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that was pretty cool is I'm talking to people here at the event is like, I've been on the air since I was a D3, you're a D3.
Right.
And, I started out in this like robotic form is like kind of the way I was described from listeners that I met here. And they're like, we thought you were just this robot. And then, as you kind of get to see my growth throughout, as a person, as a leader, my confidence, and then you start seeing my personality on air. And I think the fact that you guys are able to not do that like I did and show up a lot closer to who you really are from the beginning.
Still working on it, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's not easy, but it's impressive.
Yeah.
And so, I want people to recognize that about you guys. I think one comment that was made this morning, we had our team meeting about, where we're going. And I guess there's, I have a big group practice bias. And
Big time.
And so I thought maybe, we're here right now.
Yeah.
Let's do an episode only on solo. Right? Let's put me in a position where I'm uncomfortable. And let's see how it goes.
Yeah, so I remember you told me in the episode, when I had come here and I had shadowed in your practice, or maybe it was another episode, it doesn't matter, but you were talking about you had about a 2-week period before you had hired on an associate and the sellers had left, and you were basically operating as a solo dentist. You recall that? It was for a very short period of time. You said you hated it, but...
My initial plan was buy my practice,
yes,
work with my seller for a bit, get some experience, and then when the seller leaves, I just take over all of the dentistry, I do it all, and I'm a solo dentist, and, married at the time, so, my then wife and I would kind of alternate, so it'd be almost like a super solo, but only one of us would be there at a time.
Yes.
And so, that was sort of the plan, and... there was this week in September, my first, bought the practice, and a month later, she took a week off. My seller did.
Sure.
And so I was by myself in the office, and I just hated everything about it.
Yeah.
And I know this is me trying to this is a not group bias, but it was really that experience that made me realize that I think I want to shift gears and move towards group.
So what do you think I have a feeling that some of that was probably internal.
100%, yeah.
Maybe all of it, right? What aspects of you made you a bad fit for solo dentistry? And speak to the people that are listening right now that are going to be different than you. Some of them are. What kind of person actually does fit into that scenario, and how can it work? Because when it works, right?
Yeah, think about it. If you, financially speaking, it's a much more straightforward path to $500K a year.
Yeah.
That's a much more straightforward way of making that much money.
Right.
And I don't know how that, like, if you're listening and you hear 500K, like, I don't know how that lands with you. For me, that's, I mean, I don't want to call it relatively straightforward. Like that's rude to people that are not making 500K. But as a solo, a well-run solo practice, that's like kind of, give or take 100K. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly, that's a sum of money not a lot of people would scoff at. And if it fits into the way you like to practice and the sort of person and dentist you are, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just so happens in the small sample size that we have, that not many of us are really like that. We've got Aaron, who's pretty jet set on being a solo. Glad we have him on, and I definitely want to hear more from him and have him kind of inspire some other people like him. But I just wanted to be clear that by no means do we really mean to impart the bias of group practices over solo. But I think inherently group practices do sort of exemplify a lot of the stuff we like to talk about, right? I mean, leadership and team management and practice management, and that's where a lot of people kind of need help on anyway,
Yeah, but I think, like really when you look at it, like group practice is just like, what challenge do you want in ownership? Do you want simplified ownership and more complex, clinical workload, and or do you want a more simple clinical workload, or I guess not less dependent? Like, where do you want your success to be dependent on? Your ability to run a business or your ability to do clinical dentistry?
Yeah.
And your ability to convert patients to treatment and all that stuff. And
what grinds you down more?
Yeah, exactly. Too. Like some people get worn out from like if you talk to a dentist who's been working for like 30 years and they're like, man, just like making payroll is the most exhausting and annoying thing. And for me, like payroll, I don't even think about it. Like, it just happens. Like I don't get burnt out from payroll.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to a few of my professors at school that are very well esteemed and had a lot of great success out in private practice, and they were just kind of the types that they'd retired and decided they wanted to come and give back to the school. But they were talking about it. They were like, I love the dentistry, but I hated the business aspect of it. I didn't like the HR stuff. I didn't like payroll. I didn't like any of the business stuff. That's not what I went to school for. I just didn't like it, But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the portrait of an ideal solo at all. But maybe you understand what you don't like to do, and you design your practice around that, and it's totally valid.
Yeah, and the solo dentist has maybe too high, so let me paint a picture for what is the perfect solo practice.
Please do.
Right? Let's just call it 5 ops. You got 2 hygienists, 2 assistants, 2 front desk.
Okay. And that's ideal.
That is ideal for me in every way.
So what is the portrait of the group practice? The ideal?
Double of everything.
All of that, but double.
Yeah. So 4 hygienists, 2 dentists, 4 assistants, and I think the front desk, you just have an office manager and then either 2 or 3 additional front desk people. I think Matt and I disagree on the office manager. He has an office manager for a solo. I don't necessarily think that that's totally necessary, but to each their own. I think the solo dentist, it's a very small team, and you don't have a lot of HR. You can have everybody getting along. You don't have a lot of HR issues. Your staffing issues are a lot less. You're not hiring and firing as much.
Right.
You're just not doing any of those things because your team's smaller and your overhead's a lot less. You don't have to market as aggressively. Your new patient flow doesn't have to be as high.
Great margins.
You have a lot more control. Like, you need high new patient flow to fuel an associate versus solo practice. You can be a very efficient dentist. You can diagnose and treatment plan well. And then you don't need like a super big marketing budget, or you don't need you can just do really well and have complete control over everything that you do. Your diagnosis, your case presentation, everything can just be really dialed in. And so I think just that ability to have a really honestly, the best run practice in the world is most likely a solo office. It's so much easier to reach that peak level of performance when you are in control of every little part of it.
Yeah, and I think that your skills as a dentist are directly correlated to what you end up getting from the practice. It's a very simple in and out type thing. There's not as many other moving parts.
Yeah.
So maybe it's even more predictable in a way. And I can see how that would be attractive to a lot of people. I think that the type of people that we are and the type of ideal practice that we see tends to be a group practice just because of where we feel our strengths are and our weaknesses. But I think there's a lot of dentists out there that just aren't like us. And maybe it's even the majority that would be happier in a solo practice. I don't know.
If you were to ask me, what is the most straightforward way of, this is the pursuit of ownership, right? So I got to get back on topic. But if you were to ask me, what is the most straightforward way of making, a good income as a dentist? I would say being a solo dentist, buying a practice, doing like 800, and growing it to doing like 1.2.
Yeah.
Like that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Period.
In
you know, that's
terms-
so much easier than the group practice. Like in terms of the clinical, like the difficulty of that, like growing a practice that much, and like that's not hard.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm not trying to sound rude, right? Like it is difficult, and if you did it, you should be proud. But
Sure.
like compared to the group practice route, it's not as hard from a just every level, really finding the practice to buy, growing the practice. The practice management is not as, the necessity is not as, it's not as taxing what that requires you to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's a lot of that is sort of post-close stuff. What would you say in terms of the pursuit of ownership, like getting into an ownership opportunity? Is it easier or harder, or some people see pros and cons in trying to acquire their ideal solo practice versus an ideal group practice? Does that make sense?
Well, there's a lot more solos. Right?
It's a lot more solos.
Like,
right, it's more common.
if you like take a pool of all the dental practices available, you're a lot more likely. And then a solo, you're typically just replacing the dentist. So that's a lot more on-market type deal.
Yeah.
Like somebody's looking to retire, you walk in, replace them, and then that's it. So those practices are much more available.
Right.
And there's a lot less required to find them. But like, yeah, I'm just looking for a practice that has, 2 hygienists would be like my dream as a solo. Walking into a practice doing under $1 million with 2 full-time hygienists, that would be like the best possible scenario. Yeah. And, everything else would be really easy. But
in general, you won't have to finance as much too. It's a little less.
Yeah, right.
risk.
The purchase price is less.
Yeah, of course.
But like, if you have a practice doing 800 to 900 with 2 hygienists, buy it.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to be a solo, especially, just do it.
Easy.
Like, that would be and then you pretty much walk in as a different dentist, refine a few things, and then you're over $1 million pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That would be the most straightforward path as a solo dentist.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can very potentially be a highway to success, for a lot of people out there. So,
and I think so. The thing is deceiving is buying that like $1.2 million solo practice. I don't love that idea as much.
The one that's already at 1.2.
Yeah, I just don't because, sure, it cash flows really well, but there's really no room for growth. And
why is growth important?
That's a great question. So there's 2 schools of thought, right? Mm-hmm. One school of thought is buy the big practice that you can just walk into and keep doing what they're doing and make good money, mm-hmm. and that's fine. That's just not very taxing. Like that's not challenging yourself a lot as an owner.
Do you have to challenge yourself?
You don't have to, but you also are walking into a situation. So like if it's 2 hygienists doing 1.2, that's very different in my mind than 1 hygienist doing 1.2. Like any solo doing over $1 million that's for sale, I want to figure out why. Right. And is that something I can walk in and replicate? Yeah. We had this guy in practice underwater. It was a 1 hygienist office that was doing like 1.3 or something like that. And then he walked in and like dropped to 1.1. But like with solo, your margin is so big that like he's still making good money. He's still paying his practice note. But like, if I buy a practice that's doing 1.2, my note is like, let's say I pay $1 million for it. That's like, 10 to 11 grand a month.
Yeah.
Versus if I buy a practice doing, $8 grand or, 800,000, then I might be paying like a 675 or something. My note's 6 to 7 grand. So like that's actually a real difference. And then baking in that growth is equity that you've now gained in your practice. That's an extra, $400,000 of wealth that you've accumulated that, you wouldn't have otherwise. And the difference between a practice doing $800,000 to $900,000 with 2 hygienists and one doing 1.2 million with 1 hygienist is like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even the same number of hygienists. It just, the difference isn't huge. It's just one just happens to have a much better performing doctor than the other.
Yeah, so it's a reproducibility issue is what you're really dancing around. Yeah. I think
so.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think like at the end of the day, what would you rather spend $5,000 less per month for like 10 years on your practice note? I would. You know what I mean? And getting a practice that does, let's just say, the $800,000 to $900,000 sweet spot of like they can afford 2 hygienists, they're big enough, but they haven't really like maxed out those 2 hygienists. You don't have to get a bunch of patients. You don't have to grow that much from a patient-based size. Yeah. But you still get to grow revenue-wise to a more productive solo dentist. then yeah, like I think like 1.2 is a number I keep saying, because that's when like solo dentists who do over 1.2 is when it starts getting really challenging to keep growing. Like you have to start doing like specialty procedures that are very profitable, or like scheduling really efficiently, or something has to be going different than the typical practice.
Yeah, sure, of course. And we want to be wary of that, because if you don't match up with that, then that's going to be an issue. Like you're gonna have to change fundamentally as a dentist, and your repertoire is going to have to be different in order for you to adapt to that practice.
Yeah, like I think the 1 to 1.2 is like a good target for a solo.
Yeah.
And then after that, like if you want to be a $1.5 million solo practice, like you're doing things that are beyond the typical, you're doing things especially well.
Yeah, sure. Well, that makes sense. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we're kind of laying that out, because I fear sometimes that, I don't want TPO to rehash a bunch of things that we've already been over with shared practices.
Are we calling this TPO?
What's that?
Is this TPO, the pursuit of ownership?
Yeah.
We have acronyms for everything now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have to. It saves time. It's efficient. Okay. That's what we're about.
But then we just talked about it, so there went the efficiency.
Well, that wasn't my choice. But like I was saying, I don't want to rehash a lot of stuff, but I also don't want to assume too much.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to kind of lay out, what models we're really talking about when we say solo or group. A lot of people have no idea what that's talking about. One of my classmates actually came up to me and was like, "Yo, what's a group practice? I don't get it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" It was like, "Well, is that one practice with one doc and then a bunch of associates, or is it like someone that owns a bunch of practices?" Like the group thing actually kind of throws people off. And I was like, I didn't even think about that. Like we can be confusing people with some of our verbiage, so we kind of have to,
So do you want me to define them right now?
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think one dentist in one location is a solo practice.
Yep.
And multiple dentists in one location is a group practice. Mm-hmm. And then multiple practices is multiple locations. At least that's the terminology we're using here on the show.
That's the SP lexicon.
Yeah,
those
right.
are,
like technically group practice could be considered like, you could also use that terminology for a group of practices.
Yeah, like a DSO or something.
Yeah, but
because it gets used that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but technically we're calling it.
Yeah. So recently, and I know a lot of people are very attracted to the idea of the multiple practice ownership.
Yeah.
And some people might be curious why we don't talk about it a little bit more. So recently, and I don't know if we'll have aired it by now, but I did have a talk with Lauren Israelson, who was on season 2, I believe, of Shared Practices.
Yeah.
He's a multiple practice owner. Very happy doing it. He implements a lot of the things that we talk about. And I
literally called me like an hour ago.
Did he? Okay. Yeah. Well, it was a great interview, and I think a lot of people are going to be magnetized to it. So talk a little bit about why we don't necessarily talk about multiple practices as much.
That's not what we do. It's not on the menu.
Yeah, just not so much on the menu.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we don't talk about startups a whole lot either. What interests us is what we're going to do best. Richard is doing multiple practices. I think his experience in it has been positive, but it also hasn't been something that like we feel like the need to show people this path, because it's so rarely walked on. At that point, I'm talking to like less than 1% of my audience.
Right. And I think that's good too, because we're not necessarily saying like, these are the two paths, you come upon a fork in the road and this is the two decisions you have to make. There are other ways to get at it and be successful in this industry. But we're just talking about what we know and we like and we understand, and we're attracting an audience that understands that too.
The way that we talk about the most is buying a practice that is either one dentist or multiple dentists. Why do we do that? Because that's the most straightforward path to success in this profession.
And that's what we're preaching.
Yeah, we preach, simplicity, predictability, and sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going to tell me that a startup is more predictable and simple than an acquisition, you're lying.
Not true.
Yeah, that's just like factually not true.
Yeah.
There's no arguing with me about that.
Absolutely. Or anyone.
None.
Yeah.
Whatsoever.
Yeah.
If you tell me multiple practice ownership is more simple and predictable than single practice ownership.
Ask Richard.
Yeah, right. Also not true. There's no arguing with me about that.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like we talk to a large audience. It's our mission to provide
that's our promise,
the most predictable, simple path to a level of success that we feel is achievable for the masses.
And it's not, this isn't Michael Lappa with so many followers on Instagram and selling, $50,000 veneer cases and stuff like that. This is the dentist around, it could be just the dentist around the corner, but it's someone that has a very profitable and predictable model and how you can step into those shoes and lead a great life. Because I think that, the models that we're talking about provide a certain quality of life that most of our audience would be very happy and very fortunate to have.
Yeah, and again, and this is the thing. Like for me, my practice, we're pushing past the kind of the framework of a productive group. We're a profitable group, and we're kind of moving, into trying to do things a little bit differently. And as we do that, you take on layers of complexity, right? Like, if you want to push past the $1.2 million solo practice, it's going to get complex. And so that's where we choose to just stop here, get people to that point, and then they can,
that's your rodeo.
They can push past, and do the things differently or whatever. But
sure,
I feel like if I've gotten a dentist from the point of being a dental student who has an interest in, like, something made them listen, right? I don't know what that is. But if I can get somebody, kind of their mindset right from that point to the point of, like in a solo's case, like my practice does $100,000 a month, and I work 4 days a week, and I'm happy, and I got my staff, and like this feels like I could do this for the next 20 years, then I've accomplished what I've intended to.
So, you have done an amazing job in, preaching all that and following through it and getting yourself into that position where you are in, I guess not the ideal practice. Like, it's not quite where you want it to be. Maybe you've got some other things you want to do, but it's definitely gotten to a point where a lot of things are automatic. It's very sustainable. What's your next rock? Like, what, people don't necessarily get to that point and stay stagnant for 20 years. That type of person that gets to the point the way you have doesn't just stop all of a sudden. So what ends up being next for you? And I'm also wanting to kind of...
What a question.
Right. And it's not just a personal question either. I mean, it is, but it's also like, to speak to the audience, we're trying to help you get to that point, but maybe illustrate a little bit about, the possibilities that lie beyond that. I know that's a very vague question.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying though. Like, right. Like, what's next for me? And I don't think the answer has anything to do with dentistry.
Okay.
I mean, shared practices to an extent, but, and I'm not saying I'm going to like start some other business in another field. It's just, I think it just is personal growth and development, right? Like just being content with that. Like, I think that's what I really want to work on is not needing that next thing. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be external always. Yeah.
And so for me, it's just that personal growth and development and really building a life that I'm really proud of and happy with. And, I feel like I have one, but that's the area in which I'm focusing the most.
Yeah.
Because, my practice is fairly automatic at this point. Like, I literally go to my office. I don't do clinical notes. My staff does clinical notes.
Yeah.
And so I walk there and there's days where I sit at my desk on the computer. I don't even look at email or anything. I just don't do anything.
I can vouch for that.
Like, I just sit there.
Yeah.
And so, like, my office manager is super, she's really come into her own and, like, is very much running the show on a daily basis. I have department leads now. So I'm not super needed.
Yeah.
And it's given me space to, like, really, and, look at shared practices, right? Like, you guys have this show. Richard has his show. We got, we have a team now. And it's not just, like, George pushing this thing along.
Yeah.
And it's given me space to, like, sit there and just, like, just be there,
Yeah.
And that's been interesting for me. And, like, so, I think that's, like, I don't know, totally different than than what got me here.
Yeah. What was the phrase?
What got me here is not going to keep me here.
Is it going to keep me here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, like, I mean, right? And it's hard to say that without sounding some sort of way. But the reality is, like, if I did nothing else and just stayed exactly where
You'd be doing great.
I'd be fine.
Yeah. And you're 26?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if people know that.
I didn't know that until the last time I was here. I figured you were maybe late 20s.
Yeah, no, I'm 26.
Not based on appearances, but just like where you're at mentally and the confidence that you approach these things with, and just the sort of air of authority that you have. I would not think that you're a year older than me.
Can I go on a segment for like a little just
a tirade,
so the confidence of which I approach things?
Please.
Like, let's digest that statement. It's funny because I've heard some pretty cool comments, and, like, I don't want to get bleeped out, but, like, people said I have a fair amount of guts, and that, like, they listen to me and they're like, oh man, this guy's, like, really brash and confident, and, like, and I do make very bold decisions on a regular basis with ease.
Yeah.
But it's not with ease. Like, it's
ostensible.
I was terrified when I was buying my practice.
I like you saying that.
Terrified.
Yeah.
Like, me buying a practice that was doing $90,000 a month freaked me out.
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to do that?
Yeah. Because do you do $90,000 in production throughout dental school?
No.
In entirety?
Like, probably not, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And like, yeah, like, you know, I'm human.
Yeah.
Just like you. So like, when we started pre-owner coaching, they were like, man, I'm nervous. Like, there must be something wrong with the practice. I'm like, no, you're nervous because you're doing something for the first time.
Yeah.
That's normal.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's like, at the end of the day, I was nervous. And it's not until you do it that you're like, oh, that's fine. You know, like, I don't know for those of you guys who have had kids, but I very much like comparing the practice, like your first time buying a practice to your first time having a kid. You're like, oh my gosh, am I going to be a good parent? How am I going to know what to do? But like, you do realize that like having a child is a much bigger like responsibility and commitment than owning a practice.
Surely you can appreciate that.
Like, right? And we do like next to no training for parenting.
None.
Whatsoever.
No
and we're responsible for the livelihood of this human that we've just created. Like, at the end of the day, does that not like the weirdest thing? And then we're like terrified of this practice ownership thing.
Yeah.
It's like practice ownership is way easier in every way than having a kid.
Yeah.
You know, and I was terrified about having a kid. And I remember like, oh my gosh, the very first moment I held my child, I was like, shit, I totally made a mistake. Like, you know, and like not to be TMI, but like I was 23. This wasn't like my intended time to have a child in dental school. Like that was not my plan. And I'm like, okay, this is like way too much for me right now, you know? And my very first time meeting my team, I had the exact same feeling in my stomach of like, I'm young, I'm this kid, these people are way older than me, and they're like looking at me super skeptical, and I'm just this young dental student about to graduate.
Into?
Yeah, like what am I doing?
Yeah.
You know, and that's normal. Like I want that to be communicated as normal and not something wrong with you or meaning you're not ready, or like I was probably more ready than most people walking into practice ownership.
Definitely.
So,
there's no probably about that. Yeah.
So like, but I had those same feelings. So like if you're walking into practice ownership and you meet your team for the first time and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is scary. That's just you being a human. Yeah. That's nothing wrong with the practice you're buying, the people you're working with, anything with you, your preparedness. That's just normal.
That's confirmation that you're doing something really big.
Yeah.
And you're a sane person.
Yeah.
Because a sane person wouldn't be
if I wasn't
afraid.
Scared, like there'd be something seriously wrong. Like those people that can't feel pain.
Yeah.
Like I'd be like one of those guys. Like you punch me in the face. Like what? Did you do anything? You know, like that pain is there for a reason. Like it has a purpose. Like, you know, evolutionarily, especially. Like you know, like you're entering danger, right? You've taken like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Like this needs to go well.
It's your amygdala.
Yeah.
You know, it's the lizard brain.
You know, but I think at the end of the day, like, you know, people need to realize that too. Because like we paint this picture and like, right, I think sometimes it's hard for me, and it was hard for me when I first got on air to like see the value in sharing that, because like that's not productive information. But like
it's not data.
It's not data, you know. But like that was what I was so obsessed with when I first got on air.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that like people need to know that it's okay to feel what they feel and be who they are.
Yeah,
and for sure.
No, I think that's super valuable, and I think I felt that way. In the early times that I was listening to podcasts in general and share practices as well, like my filter was, if I don't need a pen and paper to listen to this podcast, then it doesn't have enough information for me.
Yeah.
It's not it's not novel enough,
you
know? But the further along I've gotten, I've realized that I'm starting to value more the relatable stuff and realizing these people are like me. They feel things that I feel. And I feel validated by that.
And like this episode, right? Like, are we providing, like, I'm sure we provided value, but the biggest thing I want to provide is a mindset shift of knowing that it's okay to feel scared, and it's okay to, it's normal. That's being a human, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
yeah. I like that. I think we should probably end on that note, because I wouldn't want to detract from how important that message is.
Cool. Well, I do think it's funny that we're recording a solo episode, right? Like this is me trying. So we had a discussion this morning about how there is a fear among the shared practices team, myself not included, that we talk about group practice too much and we do not focus enough on the solo practice.
George is like, what's the problem? I don't know.
Yeah, like, what's the problem with that? This is fantastic.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, hey, Jay. Yeah, I'll talk to you. We're recording right now. I'll be done quick.
See,
we'll keep that
guy.
in there.
Yeah, popular guy.
But like, yeah, like there's this thing of, well, maybe like look, I've never not confronted a bias I've had.
Yeah.
I just acknowledge it, right?
Yeah.
I have a bias. I like one better than the other for me. They both work. I've said this one's simpler. Solo practice is a simpler way of making money. Like, whatever. But this is me trying my best to talk about solo practice.
It's an effort.
And like, we want to be there for you guys and things that you need. It's just, I'm probably not the best person.
Yeah.
I know a lot about solo practice. I have solo coaching clients.
Yeah.
I just really like working with group practices, and I have a lot more fun. That's just the model that interests me. Like,
yeah.
And like, I'm happy we have Matt, because maybe we need more of Matt on the show to like,
we do.
To really talk about solo, because at the end of the day, it's just not my forte.
Yeah. And I want to start looking for some more, rock star solo people that still kind of fit the vision that we have for like that ideal solo practice, because I think it is an important perspective.
And then the challenge is tying that into pre-ownership, right? Like, finding a guest who is a dentist, who is happy as a solo dentist, but then tying that into the pre-ownership side of things.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
So I think, one thing that, and this is just me talking to Tyler on air instead of doing this off air, but like, finding somebody who, like, I guess if I'm listening to this and I'm listening to a dentist who has a practice model that I like, the question I'm going to ask myself is, what about that model do I like? I'm not just going to like, so like, you talked about $50,000 veneer cases, right? Like, what if you get super successful solo doing $50,000 veneer cases all day? And then somebody listens to that, they're like, oh, I want that.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, okay, let me go do a cosmetic thing. Well, I would encourage everybody to like stop and like say, when you feel that feeling of, oh, I want that, ask yourself why. Like, what about that appeals to you? And start learning about yourself through the stories you hear. Like, is there anything I said on the show that was, oh, wow, I want that? Then stop and ask yourself why you want that. And then you've learned something about yourself that's valuable that can be used to better inform decisions moving forward.
Yeah.
And instead of like, I don't want to call it monkey see, monkey do, but kind of essentially monkey see implant practice, monkey do implant practice.
Yeah.
Not calling you a monkey, but like, it just, what about an implant practice do you like? Do you like the implants? Do you like the, what about it appeals to you? And then practice other ways of achieving that or that same way, but like, start learning about yourself. Like, I like this, and that's why I'm going to do these practices.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the thing I did. So like, as you guys get solos on air, try to digest what they like about what they do and what they don't.
Yeah. So like, get basal, like figure out what the commonality there is, not just what it is that they're doing. Cause it might be a $50,000 veneer case, or it might just be some other thing that they're offering, but really at the core of it is something more foundational and personal. And that's kind of what we want people to identify. Am I hearing it right? Or
because like, this is the pursuit of ownership. So if I'm listening to this, I'm a pre-owner.
Yeah.
And so what am I really going to get from the episode is probably not how to have a veneer practice that does $50,000 cases.
I couldn't tell you.
It's going to be, what about that type of practice appeals to that person, and what type of person thrives in that type of practice. So then I could know something about myself and see if it fits me.
Yeah.
So I would, like, there's different types of solos out there, right? There's the bread and butter guys like me. There's implant guys. So learn about them and see like, what personality traits do they have, so then our audience can start to identify with certain people and then have better informed decisions of where they want to go.
I definitely want to give those different types that you were saying and others a voice.
Yeah.
And if you identify with that voice, then maybe that is
try to
something
analyze them.
you want to emulate.
Ask deeper questions about why they like what they do, what is important to them, and try to learn more about them.
Okay.
And that would be really interesting.
Okay. So I'm going to get Appa on the show.
Who?
Appa.
I don't know who Appa is.
That's incredible. So he's just like a very like Instagram famous cosmetic dentist. Got a practice in Dubai, and I think he just opened one up in Beverly Hills, and he's got one in New York. And that's just not the sort of thing that George would know.
Yeah, George doesn't know a lot of things.
George somehow intentionally has created this bubble around him that his circle of influence and his circle of concern are the same. You know, like, like all the things he's aware of, he has influence over. Everything else,
yeah, well, like
doesn't exist.
I think like politics, right? Like I don't follow it whatsoever.
Yeah,
I don't vote. I don't care, and it's like because I don't feel I have any control.
Yeah,
right? It's not something I can change in my life.
Yeah,
so I just tune it out. But like things that I can control and do, like I'm very careful as to what I allow to influence my opinions, judgments.
To bother you,
yeah,
and take up your time.
Yeah, take up my time, my energy, whatever.
Yeah. We could probably have an whole episode just inside the mind of George Hariri.
Not happening.
And it wouldn't be super relatable, but at least we would know where some of this is coming from. It's really entertaining.
Well, you're staying at my house right now, you know, and we're doing this thing where it's like so I had Richard and Matt over, and they complained about everything that I didn't have. And I'm like, gosh, guys, like I'm here. You're in my house. Like you're treating you nicely, and like
we appreciate it.
No,
George,
but so then I told them this time. I said, you're supposed to send me a list of everything you need, and I will get you those things.
But you assume, of course, as a normal human would, that there are at least the essentials there. That it would almost be insulting to ask for an iron.
Yeah, I do not own an iron
or a pillowcase.
Well, I had a pillowcase. But like
I didn't get one.
So
but.
Anyway, so like
oh man,
I sent them this list. They sent me this list of stuff, and I said anything on this list is what you'll have.
Can't guarantee
Otherwise,
anything else.
You don't have it. And so then we've been playing the "Do you have" game. Do you have ibuprofen? No.
No.
Do you have an iron? No.
Yeah. So,
do you have Febreze? No.
Lesser known fact about George: no iron, throws his clothes in the wrinkle-free setting on his dryer, and he's good to go.
Good to go.
So, if you're out there trying to emulate George Hariri, throw out your iron.
Get rid of your ibuprofen and Febreze.
Get rid of your ibuprofen, your Febreze. You're going back to basics for sure.
Minimalism.
It's not just minimalism. It's Stone Age-ism. It's not even acknowledging modern technologies. It's just.
All right, we better turn this off.
We should. It's getting insulting. All right. Well, thank you so much, George. I really appreciate your time. We're having an absolute blast here at VOD. That's Voices of Dentistry for those not in the know. I really encourage people to come out to these kinds of things. It's really amazing. You see a lot of faces, and you're able to put faces to the voices that are in your ear. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And I'm learning a lot, and I hope you guys learned a little something from this episode too.
I'm not letting you sign off yet. So we've had Tyler with us for like 2 years now, 2.5, something like that.
Yeah.
And he is like the most, like, it's almost like more people know him than know us at some point. And it's like I talked about, oh yeah, Tyler. Yeah, no, I met him when he was like a D2 or whatever. And like, what Tyler has come to, how many events have you come to in dental school?
I don't know.
Like over 20?
Yeah, probably.
Like on a plane, flying somewhere over 20 times.
Yeah, I never really sat down and take a record of it, but it's probably 20.
Like every time I talk to you, you're at some event doing something, mingling with like.
Yeah.
So, like I guess one thing that makes you successful is your ability to do that.
Yeah.
And so people in our audience don't know that about you. And so I want to highlight that because that is one thing that you've done that has set you apart.
Well, thank you for acknowledging it. It's fun ultimately. Like it doesn't really feel like work or anything. So I guess I don't really catalog it, and for me, they're experiences that I really enjoy, and it gets me deeper into the world of dentistry, and I don't know, I like it.
Yeah, and you grow, your mindset changes, and you're exposed to new things, and yeah.
I mean, I've probably got about, I think one time I did tally it up, I think I have about 120, 130 hours of CE that I haven't filed. I don't know, I'm never going to backdate it.
I don't know how to do that either.
I don't even know how to do it, but that's not what I'm here for. The people I meet, the influences I get they have a value that I could never quantify. And I feel that my life and my career as a dentist is just entirely different because of it. So I just can't encourage people enough. And I also want to speak to, I think there's this assumption that I must just have a whole bunch of money to do this kinds of stuff, but I really don't, and, and like I'm kind of scrounging this stuff together most of the time. But if you're an ambitious student and you reach out to people that are kind of authorities on these sorts of things, like you'd be surprised the people that will front your ticket or give you a great discount, or, maybe you can just come out and shadow their practice or something. There's no reason you can't get outside the school and go learn about the stuff you want to learn. There's absolutely no reason that you can't do that. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing it now. It's a conscious decision you're making not to. So I implore people to explore that. But yeah, thank you for.
So in however many years when you own a practice and you're successful, and I'm not saying that as an if, that's a when.
It's an if.
That's a when. No, seriously, it's a when.
Okay, thank you.
When, this is why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period.
That's absolutely fair. I mean, there's no question that
success is never an accident.
Yeah.
You are going to be very successful. That's not an accident.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, the timeline has dramatically shifted.
Sure.
My mindset has shifted. There's no way that without podcasts, without the people that put their voices out on the waves, that I would be doing anything that I'm doing right now. And I am so very thankful for that. I mean, ultimately this stuff started, reading Dental Town articles, and Howard Ferrand seated like 50 feet away from me, and across from me is George, and I used to read his messages on the forums, and it's a watershed moment for me, but it's still only the beginning, so it's exciting.
It's going to be fun to follow you.
It is.
I'm excited, man.
It is.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
All right, folks. So that was a trip. That was a good conversation between he and I. I didn't know where it was starting or where it was going to end, but listening to it back, I'm actually pretty happy with it. So very curious to hear the thoughts that Clay and Aaron have. So let's start with Clay.
Sure. I think probably my biggest takeaway was when it was kind of towards the end, when George was talking about how people see things in the dental industry and they say, oh yeah, I definitely want to do that. Or I think that would appeal to me. And I think the biggest thing is you have to find out your why and really figure out why do you want those things that you think you do. And I think that's going to save you a lot of time on the front end and a lot of heartache, I think, so that it doesn't lead you down a path that you get there and you realize, oh, I don't really want to be here. I didn't want to do this, and I thought I did. So I think having that anchor and having that kind of pillar of figuring out why you want to do the things you want to do, I think is really, really important when looking for a practice to buy. Aaron, what did you think?
A quick thing about your point, that figuring out your why, I think is going to be one of the hardest questions that anybody's going to be able to do. And I don't fault anybody for not knowing that straight off the bat. It's hard to get that introspective, that clear with yourself without having a little bit of experience behind it. But yeah, figuring out your why is the pinnacle of this whole journey, I guess.
I mean, that's 100% true. It's just, it's simple, but it's hard, like, oh yeah, just figure out why you want to do the things you want to do. But I think that takes a lot of introspection and a lot of thinking about yourself and where you want to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a bit off topic, but I remember that part of the conversation where I mentioned Michael Lappa's like $50,000 veneer cases, which they may be more than that. I don't know. And George didn't know who Appa was. And I hope that illustrates just a little bit of what it's like to be inside the George bubble. And how little this guy is aware of, even in dentistry, really. I mean, it's a small world, folks, and it's smaller in George's head. I mean, he just lives and breathes the stuff that he has influence over, and it's just amazing the degree to which he's minimized his exposure to just outside things. I just thought it was so funny. Like, I don't know. I'm glad that got caught on camera, because sometimes, not on camera, but on record, because sometimes he'll not be aware of certain things, and I don't know if it's just like a second generation thing or what it is, but I'm just like, how did this avoid you for so long? Like, how did this information not come across you?
It's just 100% George, though. I mean, like, that's.
Oh, it is. Yeah. No, that was good. But yeah, aside from that, like actual, hard data stuff. So one thing that was really interesting to me was a question. It came up about deciding between an $800,000 office and a 1.2 million in terms of collections. And I was telling Aaron and Clay this earlier, but if you asked me to answer the question between what would you choose, all other things equal, the 800 or the 1.2, as George, I would have had a total opposite answer before he explained what he was saying. Like, it made sense later. But to me, we've always talked about, buying the biggest practice that, you can get finance for. And he started talking about, growth, and growth is kind of a confusing concept, because it's like, you want to buy this practice that is doing really well, and you want to step in, you want to replicate that and inherit that cash flow and make it work for you. And that's kind of what a lot of this sounds like. But sometimes growth is really important, because in terms of reproducibility, it can be a lot easier to step into that smaller practice that has that smaller note, maximize it to the 1.2 that it really should be at and it belongs at. And then you're dealing with a smaller note and you're coming away with more money. And it's funny, because it's just the growth aspect of it can kind of be tricky, because there's some opportunities we see where you're looking at like a $400,000 practice and it's super cheap. And people always say, well, what if I just double it and I grow it and I got this little note? And we're like, no, that's like a pseudo startup. You're dealing with something too small. So it's just sort of counterintuitive. And we want to have these rules of thumb that we just apply to everything. But some things are conditional, and the numbers do matter. It's not just the concept of doubling things, the concept of growing things. Like when George is talking about the $1.2 million threshold, that's kind of important to really think about, especially in terms of solo offices, getting up to that 1.2 mark, and how that progress is made really matters, especially in terms of reproducibility. So that was something that kind of struck me, and I was surprised during the interview. I was like, man, this is kind of throwing me for a loop. So that's something that I came away with, and everything else that we were talking about was pretty valuable, I thought. So yeah. So any other thoughts, Aaron, Clay?
Yeah. So my biggest takeaway about the whole episode was George's candor when he talked about being scared when he was actually buying the practice. In my mind, I thought he was like, he had this idea that he was just going to go ahead and go for it, and there was no fear behind it all, that he was just, I'm going to find this practice, I'm going to buy this practice, I'm going to grow this practice. But him actually being honest with everyone and saying that I was scared. It's totally okay to be scared. But what separates somebody who's going to succeed and somebody who's not going to succeed is them being able to push through that fear and actually still, accomplish the goal.
Yeah, I mean, I feel scared, and I'm looking to buy the practice, and I think, Aaron's a D4 now, and he's going to be looking for a practice, and I'm sure he's scared too, and Tyler right there too. I mean, it's a natural feeling to feel scared when you're talking about leading a team, being the boss, having that note over your head, right? Like, that's a lot of pressure, and people don't do this once a month, right? This isn't a weekly thing that people do. This is most likely a once in a lifetime decision, and it's normal to be scared. And I think that was really, I think the listeners got a lot. Listening to that made me feel more comfortable and realize, hey, this is normal. Even George feels this way, right?
Right. I mean, I think it's easy to kind of look at George and assign some mystical properties to him. And getting to know him, I think that there are certain circumstances in his life that have better prepared him for doing things as early in his life as he has. Like we said, he's only 26, but I wouldn't be so quick to think of him as someone that's just led an entirely different life than you, and he's doing something that you couldn't necessarily do, because George is neither fearless nor reckless. He's someone, and the same can be said for Matt and Richard. They're people that calculate these risks, but ultimately they believe in what they're preaching, and they take that leap, but they don't do so in the absence of fear. I think there's some quote about courage is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it, or something like that. I don't know.
Sure, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's probably, I don't know, Roosevelt said it or someone, I don't know.
Michael Scott.
I think it was Churchill. I think it was Michael Scott quoting Churchill.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really important takeaway. Like, the fear is totally sane. It's totally normal. You should feel that whenever you're making such a big transition. And if you don't, then, maybe you are a particularly reckless person. But otherwise it's a good mental sanity check to understand that, that's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean you're not ready. It doesn't mean you're not clinically prepared. It doesn't mean you're not mentally prepared. In fact, it just means that, you're checking the right boxes in terms of, whether or not you should make that decision. I think, he kind of had this personal narrative about what it was like to, hold his son for the first time at 23. And he's thinking, what have I done? And right. And, that still has worked out, beautifully for him. But,
Yeah.
Anytime you're coming upon such a large life shaping moment, you're going to have that. It's related to imposter syndrome of like, I really shouldn't be in this position. I've messed something up and this is not going right. So I appreciated him being so vulnerable with that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that pretty much sums up the thoughts. I'm sure listeners have some thoughts as well. And really, I'd love to hear them. If you got some, post them on the Facebook page, email us at sptheinterns@gmail.com, or reach out to one of us on Facebook. You're more than welcome to. So hope you guys really enjoyed that. We got some more VOD episodes coming up, and looking forward to hearing from you guys. All right. Appreciate it.